Now we are live.
And welcome, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. It is Thursday, April 16th. And we have with us Jack McCullough, who is with Vermont Legal Aid and Mental Health Law Project and former mayor of Montpelier. Welcome, Jack. And if you could identify yourself for the record and please weigh in on S-193.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Jack McCullough. I'm the director of the Mental Health Law Project of Vermont Legal Aid. And in that capacity, we represent everybody in the state of Vermont who is facing any kind of involuntary psychiatric treatment, either hospitalization, involuntary medication, or other psychiatric treatment in the community. As of a few years ago, we are also doing cases in the criminal division for defendants who have been found incompetent to stand trial or not guilty by reason of insanity. And I should start out by apologizing for the confusion of being here. We went through many possible dates for me to be here, and so I'm glad we were able to connect.
That's no problem. And feel free to come back too, if you miss things or want to follow up.
Thank you. What I want to say in general is that we don't think that this is a bill that is either necessary or helpful to the mental health system or to the safety of the general public. It's important to note that all across the state, either in hospitals or living in the community, there are people who have been diagnosed with a mental illness and have been determined that as a result of the mental illness, they pose a danger either to themselves or others. And that is true of everybody who's receiving involuntary psychiatric treatment in Vermont. There's essentially, up until this point, there's really no difference among the range of people who are receiving involuntary psychiatric treatment between people who got there by way of the civil process set forth in Title 18 or the criminal process as set forth in Title 13. In both cases, it requires a showing that the person has a mental illness, and as defined in statute, the same definition in both chapters, and as a result of the mental illness, they pose a danger to themselves or others. And that is, for someone who's hospitalized, that comes about because there's a judicial determination. There is eventually a judicial determination that the person poses a danger, and that the only way for that person to not pose a danger to themselves or others is if they are involuntarily hospitalized. And we represent people in those cases. We make the arguments that we can make that the person may not be diagnosed correctly or may not pose the danger that someone else thinks they pose, but ultimately there's a judicial determination by clear and convincing evidence that the person poses a danger, and they would pose a danger unless they were detained in the hospital or someplace else. Similarly, everyone who's on an order of non-hospitalization is there because it's been determined that they have a mental illness, and that the constraints that are imposed on them in the order of non-hospitalization, what we call an ONH, are necessary to keep them from continuing to be a danger to themselves or others. And those conditions generally include continuing to accept outpatient psychiatric treatment, go to their appointments with their providers, go to accept the medications that are prescribed for them. In some cases, reside in a particular location, including either a group home, their own apartment sometimes, or the one locked residential facility in the state, River Valley Therapeutic Community Residence. And so all those conditions are the same. And what can happen, and the treatment that people receive once they've been committed, either through the criminal process or the civil process, is essentially the same. They receive treatment that's been determined as medically necessary, psychiatrically necessary to address the symptoms of their psychiatric diagnosis. Now, up until this point, I've represented a number of people who've been found incompetent to stand trial or not guilty by reason of insanity. And being found incompetent is much, much more common. But I've represented a number of people who've initially been found incompetent and received treatment, long-term psychiatric treatment, sometimes for a number of years, and eventually been found by the result of their psychiatric treatment, eventually been found competent to competent to stand trial. And if once they're found competent to stand trial, then they're able to proceed through the criminal process, go to trial, either be found guilty or not guilty. If they're found guilty, be sentenced, sometimes enter into a plea agreement. All of those things are able to happen under the system as it's designed now. Well, some of the specific objections we have to this bill are questions as much as anything. But so to summarize that part of my testimony, we do not need this bill to achieve the legitimate public safety interests that this bill is intended to advance. Some of the questions we have include, what are the competency restoration services the bill talks about? It's not really defined in the statute. How is it different from the treatment that people receive now? And where's the evidence that it is effective or more effective than what people are getting now? What's the evidence that we even have the ability to provide competency restoration services? And where's the evidence that it can only be provided in a locked facility? Where's the facility going to be? How much is it going to cost? And why is it determined in the bill that the Department of Corrections is the appropriate agency to provide these services? Because for everything I've heard and everything I've observed is that there are serious issues with the psychiatric treatment that is provided at corrections.
Would you please repeat that last sentence? All you've heard is what?
That there are serious concerns about the psychiatric care that people, or the treatment that people who have psychiatric needs get in corrections.
Currently. Yes.
Yeah, currently, yeah. Yeah, I wish it were not the case, but I have one client that I'm representing now, or I'm not representing right now, but we do see clients who come into our caseload who are being held in corrections pending the criminal processes. They get to the point where their psychiatric illness acts up so much that they can't be safely treated in corrections. They wind up getting sent to a psychiatric hospital for that, get treated in the psychiatric hospital, get returned to corrections. Sometimes they bounce back to the hospital again. It's not a great way to run a railroad. there are, throughout the bill, there are points where somebody, the court or the Department of Corrections or somebody, is supposed to determine whether there's a likelihood that at some point in the future, the defendant will be able to be restored to competency. I don't know how they're supposed to make this determination and what the evidence is that it's possible to make that determination. We have a bunch of concerns relating to due process that I raised in judiciary. I don't think I necessarily need to raise them with you unless you're interested in having me do so. But those are the sort of a high level description of the concerns that we have.
Right.
And I'm happy to answer any questions.
We have a few here, correct?
Jack, thank you for being here. I want to dig a little deeper into your statement, your testimony that is getting at that there's no indication that this has to happen in a locked facility, that competency restoration has to happen in a locked facility. And I'm not disagreeing with you, but the statement we're going to hear from the folks who do disagree with you is that that may be true, but we're talking about somebody who, if not receiving treatment for a mental illness, has been credibly charged with a crime that would result, if found guilty, in a life sentence. So can you tease that out for me at all? For that small number of cases, right, where we still have to evaluate and provide treatment for potential competency restoration, inside or outside of a locked facility, what are your thoughts on doing that for somebody who has been credibly charged with a life sentence violation?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the evaluation of the danger that the person poses at that moment. Someone that you describe would likely be committed to a psychiatric hospital and be held there in a locked facility under the current circumstances. But I do represent people who have been treated to the point where they can be safely treated outside of any locked facility in the hospital. But that's an individual determination.
Sure.
based on their condition, how much they've improved, what their behavior is in the facility. And if they get to the point where their competency is restored, then they would be in a position of having the court evaluate whether they're entitled to bail or
Right. Okay.
other conditions.
But the competency restoration in and of itself is first, and that doesn't happen. Your testimony is that shouldn't happen regardless of level of offense that they've been charged with. The competency restoration is a separate and initial process.
Yeah, it depends on, as I said, the level of danger they pose at any
Right.
given-
Yeah. Okay.
Karen?
In those situations, in your experience, where an individual competency was restored, have there been any who have not been convicted of the crime that they were charged for?
I think so, but I'm not sure, and I'm kind of hedging because once they're back in the criminal system, I wouldn't be representing them. But I know that some of the people who had those charges up in Chittenden County wound up going to trial or pleading and being convicted of something, whether it was the original charge or something else. I don't know. I can think of another guy that I represented on and off for a period of years who might have been found competent to stand trial, but then died of a heart attack or something before he went to trial. So there's a range.
I hear there's a range, but, okay, thank you.
So other than that, I just don't know. Hate to give you an answer that I'm not sure of.
Understand. I guess I need to ask one more question.
Sure.
I hear your clear recommendation that this is an unnecessary law. And in the absence of this, the status quo will continue. Is the status quo better than what this law would attempt to do?
I would say yes. It occurred to me that there's one thing that I didn't mention that I should, which is that I hear from the supporters of this bill that they think this might apply only to 6 people a year. And I'm very concerned that there's no magic wand that's going to get those 6 people competent within a year. And so they're going to still be there at the end of the year, and we're going to see another 6 people, and there's going to be an endless increase in the number of people in this this system that's supposed to be very limited. As far as whether it's better than the current system goes, I don't really think it is. I try to keep my comments brief, but I can't help but say that if we want to do anything to improve the mental health system in Vermont, the most important thing we could do is put a lot more money into the community system so that people have housing, people have services, so they're not even getting to the point where they're susceptible of committing crimes, major or minor. And most of the people found incompetent are charged with pretty minor crimes.
So Jack, is there a gap in our system currently in terms of competency restoration? Regardless of this bill, I mean, is there a gap right now?
Well, I don't know whether you call it a gap or not. It's certainly true that our mental health system, as it's designed today, is not designed for competency restoration. That's just not the purpose of the involuntary mental health system. So this would be adding something that isn't in the system today.
So I mean, this bill, of course, puts everything under corrections, but if we were looking at really developing from scratch a restoration, competency restoration, policy and program, in your mind, what would that look like? Have you contemplated that at all?
Not a lot. I think that if we're going to design a system to provide some kind of psychiatric treatment for people, I would probably be looking to mental health rather than corrections. But that's probably the extent that I've spent thinking about that question.
That's helpful. Other questions, thoughts, folks? Thank you, Jack. I don't know if you have any final words you want to say.
I don't. I'm good. I'm heading out of town for a few days tomorrow, but I'm always happy to be at your disposal if you'd like to hear from me again. Thanks for
Right. Well,
putting me in.
yeah, thank you for quickly adjusting your schedule.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
Good.
Come on, folks.
Yeah. I'd like to spend some time as a committee just talking about how we move forward with the bill, what's concerns, flagging things so we can start figuring out how we move forward. Do you want to take a break before we do it? Do you want to keep working?
I'm going to keep working.
We could keep them working too.
Okay.
I just took a walk before this, so.
It's a tough one, folks. It's a tough one.
I mean, on one hand, you see that they need something and that, it seems like some people care enough to make it work in the Department of Corrections. But then on the other hand, people are like Jack and stuff are coming in here and saying that it shouldn't be in a correctional, facility or atmosphere. So it's really hard to, and I think that's kind of where it starts. And we can look at this bill all day long, but it really is two thoughts here. That one, it should be in a facility that is based on recovery and getting competency, and just is it. You gotta ask yourself, do you really see that happening in these cells that we've seen? Is it really going to happen there? But anyway, that's something that I just said.
What I think I heard yesterday was in the absence of this kind of legislation, WellPath can't provide the additional services that they could provide. Period.
Yeah.
Now, whether we want them doing it, whether we want to spend that money, whether this is the best, those are all good questions, but I'm hearing that this bill could enhance the currently broken or inadequate system by allowing WellPath to provide more services. Sure.
On that, I'm more convinced after yesterday's conversations with both DMH and WellPath that there has to be a clean wall between those who provide treatment toward competency restoration and those who provide the evaluation of whether or not competency restoration
Agreed.
is to happen. So I just want to put that out there. I want to back up though and talk just a little more. I want to do some sort of how we got here consideration. And I would encourage us all to realize that we are a moment in time, right? In any given biennium, the people who are around these desks that make these decisions changes. And some people have been here throughout many terms and have a lot of the history here, but how we got here is important because we are suddenly being asked to address an issue that has been neglected probably at least in the short history since Irene shut down the mental facility. So it was 2011, right?
Yeah.
And when that happened and our mental health services dispersed from Waterbury, for whatever reason, the people who make these decisions decided not to focus on the absence of a forensics facility, right? That fell to the bottom of the list.
It wasn't even in our, yeah.
Right. So, and that then, so we're at 15 years, so 7+ bienniums of people sitting around these tables, not asking the question, what about a forensics facility? 14 years, 15 years of a governor saying, we are not going to invest in a forensics facility. And here we are. The 11 of us now sit at these same chairs and have been tasked with fixing that disregard. And I worry that we're looking at the lazy / cheap / easy Band-Aid fix. And I don't think that makes good policy. Because 15 years from now, people are going to say, how did they make that decision? Or why did they make that decision? And I think it's a point that Connor has made a number of times. We are in this moment of time, regardless of how much disregard precedes us, where we have an opportunity to do this correctly. I am profoundly worried about opening this door that currently gives the keys to that door to the DOC to be at the helm of decisions that should not be made in a corrective, in a correctional context. That's my worry. We are at a point in time, and what precedes us has brought us here. What follows us will be our legacy. And I think we have an opportunity here to make a really important decision.
Who do you think has the keys now that you're worried about us giving them to?
We don't have a forensics facility right now.
That's not the answer.
That is absolutely the answer. Everybody has told us that. We do not have a forensics
Who is
facility.
responsible? If it's not DOC now, who is now? Where does the buck stop now for the people that need help now? If it's not DOC, which department is
It's
responsible?
being handed back and forth. That's what's happening
So
right now.
nobody is.
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay.
Well, in some instances, you just got people on the street who are dangerous.
Right, right.
That's what.
We've got the gap. We've got a crack.
The gap.
Yeah.
I'm not in a profound moment, but I would agree with most of what Troy said. The one thing I will say is that the issue has come up many, many times. And I know in my time it has, and certainly in their time, Mary and Alice's time. And I can't speak to exactly why things fell apart. I know from what I was involved in, why things fell apart, with certain people really being opposed and the right people at the right time. And I'm not saying I agree with any of those, but like a lot of stuff, it's not that people ignored it. It's that they couldn't agree. Or again, sometimes it is the right person saying, I don't want it, and everybody goes, well, that's the person. But we are in a moment. Things I tell people all the time, we're just but a speck in the timeline, but it's our time. I do worry about doing it the wrong way. I worry about I think there's a general consensus, maybe I'm wrong, that people don't really like the way it's laid out here. That if we do codify it, then that means, okay, we can wash our hands and not move to what we believe, or many of us believe is a better system. But then at the same time, and this is where, the two sides of things come in all the time, is believing that adding at least policy that allows and dictates the provisions for treatment are important. But the other thing is, because we don't do that now, and they don't seem like they're allowed to and whatever, but the other part is the part that we really agree on is that whether it's WellPath or somebody else, whatever the contractor is providing the services, the treatment, I think there should be a very strict wall between them and who determines competency. So I agree 100% on that part. I mean, I agree 95% on the other stuff, but 100% on that part. Because, and that has nothing to do with WellPath or anybody else. I just personally think that's better practice no matter what. It could be just a person on the street. I don't think you grade your own test, so to speak. So, okay. Our rambling's done.
Oops.
Just a question to the chair, which is, what do you view as our committee's role in this? Are we going to straw how we feel about this bill? I mean,
Well, we do have quite a few sections in there that pertain directly to corrections. And that really is our focus. How do we navigate that piece? How do we navigate the facility if they're gonna put them in a correctional facility? How do we navigate that? What would? I'm gonna kind of backtrack into Jordan's testimony. Is, do we first look at a feasibility study? Do we do it in corrections? Begin with and do a feasibility study, and that comes back to us. What's in the bill beginning July this year, there's rulemaking. The DOC in consultation with DMH and Dale to start implementing it within a few weeks. Do we want to begin rulemaking immediately before we know what the structure is even gonna be. And what Charlie said in terms of the rulemaking, we haven't dealt with the victims within that either, and that has to be dealt with. So we putting the cart before the horse by allowing rulemaking to go forward. Before we know what the structure is.
And so the follow-up is then, to the degree that our bailiwick is DOC and what they're gonna do about it, we've heard from the commissioner what he will or won't do about it, or at least what his intentions are.
And do we feel secure in that?
Well, and this is the purpose of that, because it's not an individual person thing, I don't think, because multiple commissioners have kind of had the same interpretation. That seems a lot more gray than what we feel we're looking at, that seems a lot more black and white. You know, it's concrete, like the bill says X. They're like, I don't really think it means that. I'm like, but it kind of does, like for the separated separated unit that swaps, blah, blah, blah. But no, I think we could put them in the general population. I don't think that's what this bill says. Maybe I'm the one that's wrong. Maybe all of us are.
Well, to the degree that there's wiggle room, I think you heard which way we're gonna wiggle. So,
Right, but I don't see this as having wiggle room. So maybe, like I said, I could be the dumb one or the one who's reading it wrong. But I'm concerned that it's not about personalities, that if two people can read the same thing and have two different conclusions. Either one of them is really wrong, or it's just really badly written, which I don't necessarily think that's the case, but I'm just saying, it's concerning to me that there can be different interpretations.
Already.
Right, and we're never gonna get that far.
Yeah.
So if there is if there's different interpretations, then we have to look and say, okay, well, even though we think it's clear, we need to do something to make it more clear, at the very least.
So that's where language could, if we do this, language could be drafted. It's very, very clear that you would say that a forensic facility would be a separate unit. Folks would not be in general population. It would be a separate unit, one in Chittenden and one in another facility. That's how you could tailor language. The other thing that just popped in my mind that you could do, also that they wouldn't be able to go forward with doing anything within a correctional facility or DOC or a forensic facility
Mhm.
until the legislature signs off.
Which I think that's important.
To put that in as well.
well, I guess for a last stop on the same line of comment and inquiry, then, I mean, we've had experience with this department before, and the notion of micromanaging or what your lane is. I wonder how that would play out, and I guess I can't presume, but
It's not just the department, it's providing services to the minors who are not competent to stand trial or have been deemed by the court not guilty by reason of insanity. So, you know, that's what we're looking out for, as well as public safety. I mean, what I've picked up from the committee over the last week and a half, we've been working on this. People really want a safe and secure place folks who are currently not competent to stand trial, or for the one or two folks over the years who have been deemed, you know, not guilty by reason of insanity. I've picked up that people really want to take care of those folks, but what is the appropriate setting? And under whose jurisdiction? That's the issue. It's not the issue of really taking care of the folks. It's under whose jurisdiction? What does a facility, how does it operate? What does it look? Kevin?
I don't want to sound harsh, but if the individuals have committed felony,
We don't know
you
that.
don't.
I understand that. Hear me out. Hear me out. If they've committed the felony, no matter what the reason or conditions were, the law says that under these two conditions, we're not going to call them guilty. We're not going,
Not the competency one.
competency and insanity. They're not competent to stand trial, even though we know they
But
did it.
that's not.
No, we
the
don't know,
defense.
Kevin. That's an
That's
important
not
core
defense.
function here. They are innocent until proven guilty. We can't
That's
prove
not-
them guilty because they can't go to court.
It's our
So they are
constitution.
innocent. They are
I
not,
understand the legal procedure there innocent until
Our
proven guilty.
Constitution.
I know, that's where I'm going.
What Kevin's point is, let's pretend all of us see Joe kill somebody right now. So we know that he did it. So just put that, like, take out the legal aspect. Joe, he's trying to make an argument about you know that it happened. Right, move on, work from there.
Now, under those circumstances, currently,
Sorry, Joe.
they are
was just
they're
looking
innocent
around for the
until
weapon.
proven guilty.
He's thinking about it.
Until that changes, we're going to have a gap
Yes.
in what to do with them. So we either continue doing what we're doing, or we put money into a different way of handling them. And where does that line up with the 860 children that need adequate schools? Where does that line up? I mean, there's a whole long list. And so from a realistic standpoint, we have to have a priority on where are we going to spend huge amounts of money. Otherwise, we're just gonna keep chasing our tails. And we can't solve that, but that's what we're trying to do right now, is to figure out whether we should promote something that we can't afford right now.
There are choices being made about what we can afford and what we cannot, and I'm not willing to make a second class of citizen to avoid the questions about proper levels of taxation.
I understand that.
I'm not sure.
All right, so we're doing a committee conversation in terms of where should we go with the bill? What are items that we should look at? What type of language change should we do? And just the general struggle that we're all having with putting this under corrections. I think that is the crux of putting it under corrections. That's the crux of the issue. That's where we are, which is open conversation.
chill conversation.
That's right.
That's right. You tell.
I do want to explore more the concept that was presented by ACLU this morning about flip-flopping here, right? Let's do the study. And I am not one to create another study. We did it with telecom, right? But and have that the feasibility, the who question, who should house this question. Let's do that study and report before we hand the keys to whoever is decided to should be at the helm. And I would much prefer that study be conducted by somebody outside of the Agency of Human Services. So an objective sort of, I don't know if this is, I don't know who this is. I don't know if this is state governments, if this is Prime Research does this. I don't know who does that, but somebody outside of the Agency of Human Services makes a determination about what is best practices for states in our scenario.
Until we understand what size the rock is that we've got to find, which sounds like it's judiciary, i.e. page 11, lines 10 through 12, the 13, until we understand that, we don't have enough definition to do what we need to do. Until we fully understand what the federal Constitution tells us we must do with these people, we can't make any real decisions. Designed and operated for recovery. We all agree with that. Community-based residential treatment. What does that mean? According to the federal law, which has some bearing unless Vermont sues the federal system and says you're wrong because we can't agree on what the words are. The federal law is what we need to understand first. And that's not in our committee, is what I've been told.
I'm not saying it's not in our committee, it's. We can hear that, we can take testimony on that if
Yeah.
it's want, but to really understand how it plays out. Is Judiciary Committee understands that a lot better than we do, because they live it day to day in that committee, just like they don't understand capital.
I'm with you.
It's that same kind of thing, but they don't understand a lot about the minutia of corrections.
Right.
So, you know, we can hear about the constitutionality of it.
Right.
It would be our legal counsel that would weigh in. We can do that. And we can also check in with House Judiciary and see where they are. Whatever your name is, Con.
I barely know myself. It's, sorry to be late to the party here. Had an amendment in education.
That one.
Throwing a few bombs, see where they land, you know.
Yes.
So I think we had the right model last biennium, right? A plan came to this committee that envisioned it, you know, sort of attached to the current psychiatric hospital, where I think the experience and expertise does lie to care for this population here. What we've done is, I think, almost dishonest. We're telling the public, for public safety, we're going to have a new facility, but it's not a new facility. We may as well scratch the word facility out of the bloody bill. It's not a facility.
Right.
It is status quo with hiring a couple more staffers, and that's not progress to me. You know, I think we have a snapshot of time to get this right, and we're on a path that's going to put us in jeopardy of lawsuits, and it might save money, but at the end of the day, these are people's constitutional rights, and I'm not willing to nickel and dime that. This is a core pillar of our democracy, right, we're talking about, and we need to do it right. And I totally agree, for public safety, we need to close this loophole. We need some facility, but this isn't it. And I just cannot get behind any bill. I cannot vote for a bill that has this under the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections. I'm okay with maybe a model where there's a facility on the campus of a correctional facility for the safety that we're talking about. But as far as the practitioners, I spent 10 years representing correctional officers and psych techs. It is not the same job. And if you're going to restore competency, you need the right people doing the job. And it's a 24/7 process. It's not calling in a doctor to do an hour session here or there. It's dealing with these people 24/7 because that's where their needs are. So I've heard witnesses on this bill give completely different answers. In the supposed AHS structure where everybody's at the table talking to each other, it doesn't seem like they've talked about this too much, you know? So I'm really uncomfortable with the bill as written. I'll vote against it as written. And I think we need to find out another process or another structure for it to even be close to like passing the straight face test. That's where I'm at.
I would still suggest looking into the feasibility of some kind of interstate contact.
We talked about that the other day, and that's a stepping stone I would want us to look into to see if in that, so that we can do this right.
One scenario, maybe, you know, if that's a possibility, you do that, and then you can actually look at what something in state might be like, because what they can't be on the street, this loophole can't exist. And if you just study it and do nothing, you know, you're leaving time bombs out in public. That's not good. I wouldn't want to be sitting here next year when something awful happens somewhere because we took no action. But the proposed action isn't not particularly tasteful in many respects. So
I asked Tate, I don't know if you know, I know that there has been studies done in the past about the facility, forensic facility. Have you been able to find anything?
I haven't found specific studies. I found mentions of it from past reports from DOC and AHS, but not specifically study focused on.
And what?
Anything from DOC would have been long.
Yeah, and how long ago, and what context were those taken?
Well, this is 2018 in accordance with Act 200. So actually a 2021 report from Act 200, 2018, Vermont's Institution for Mental Disease.
Sorry, I'm dates.
And then let's see, there were a few reports from that in subsequent years.
seemed like there was something fairly, well, we also did something fairly recent, didn't we, where we were gonna convert those beds in Middlesex. Wasn't there something?
Even for the youth.
No, and that's not Middlesex, the secure residential.
Act 89.
2 years ago, you were up in Human Services at that point. And if we were gonna convert a few of those beds, was there further work that was gonna be done on that?
I think it died because of the whole issue we heard yesterday, which was that they couldn't figure out how or didn't want to have them divided appropriately, not to affect
Medicaid, that's the issue,
um
that's the real issue. That is the issue.
this says that there was a forensic working group, which we already would know about 24 member from 2023. And I don't know, that's just generic, but Act 89 says they had
Is this something? I'm going
yeah,
for?
some 9 bed, that's what we were
A
just talking
24
about.
member group was tasked,
I would assume coming out of this Act 89, but still only thing that really shows up is Dartmouth study
yeah.
and then what we're doing now. So that's really historically. We'll scroll down this. A report regarding correctional facility. That's that, I think that's really that. Not bigger. So it's
Yeah,
just,
forensic facility
18.
may share the state
yeah,
hospital.
so is it, everything goes back to S 89. So then it really gets listed, so.
And again, the issue was Medicaid.
Yep.
I meant to ask the Commissioner of Mental Health where our waiver was for the Medicaid waiver, because we have a waiver for our state hospital, because it's over 16 beds. We have a waiver to get Medicaid. So these are the thoughts, folks. We need something. We need a facility that's based on recovery. The question is, does that happen or can that happen in correction? WellPAV doesn't provide now, and the bill would allow them to provide services. We need a clean wall of separation between treatment and evaluation. We need a policy for treatment. Let's do the feasibility study first in terms of who is housed and where before we hand over the keys. We do a feasibility study, we do it outside of the agency services. We need to understand the constitutionality. We attach a facility to the state hospital, we looked at that before. Do we design a model for a facility built, forensic building to be operated by mental health folks, not DOC, but on a DOC campus? And do we look at the feasibility of an interstate compact as a stepping stone?
Mhm.
That's what I've heard.
That sounds like a very reasonable wrap up.
Yeah, but I don't know where we
How
go.
do we whittle down those questions to get to our,
So what if we, I just putting something out on the table. What if we did look at a feasibility study that, hey, that has to happen first, folks, before we jump off the cliff here. And if we did do that, would we have folks from Agency of Human Services as well as stakeholders? Like, you can have ACLU or the SCA. Legal aid. Folks that represent mental health, the folks going to
Sure.
mental health folks. Do we put together a task force from, that covers most of the bases to come back with a recommendation in June? I'm just putting thoughts on the table to see if we can. Because I think we all have concerns. We don't want to hand the keys over to a Commissioner of Corrections to have custody of all of this. We're all in agreement kind of about that one. there's some real issues there, which we haven't even weeded all those issues out.
Would say I agree with that, except if there's a risk to the public with doing nothing while we're doing this study, then I think that's a factor we need to factor in there, because we certainly want to do the right thing for the 5 or 6 individuals. But I'll be frank, those who are being offended, the victims, in my opinion, need to be at least equally represented, if not higher, because that's what the job of the government is to protect and serve. And if we're not protecting, then we're not doing the most basic thing that the government is supposed to do.
So a forensic facility does not become, in corrections, does not come effective until January 1st, 2028. We automatically are taking care of it immediately.
Right.
Okay? Connor.
I guess the question with the stakeholder group, right? Because I kind of like the idea. At the same time, every testimony I've heard has been pretty rigid in the opinion.
Well, that's been part of
And
the issue.
do we think that, the parties coming together can move each other? I don't know.
Or is it an outside group? Totally, that,
I mean, I would say one thing, like, one person I'd love to hear testimony from is a neutral psychologist who performs competency exams, who isn't connected to the state or anybody else, who could just say, what are the best practices?
That would be
Yeah.
through our Committee on Healthcare and Human Services. They
Yeah.
would have that.
somebody from out of state.
Yeah, maybe somebody from out of state, I don't
In
know.
the state that does this, somebody that's professional there.
Because it feels like everybody who comes either works for somebody or has some skin in the game, that they're,
They don't.
or they don't, yeah.
Well,
wanna
when we
take an
heard
easy way out.
we heard yesterday and from other testimony, everyone says they're collaborating. I don't really see it happening.
Well, they're collaborating, but they all agree DOC how to do it.
Right.
That's where they're collaborating.
Okay, that's the only avenue they see as feasible. Yeah, we can make decisions.
Right.
And we can make commitments, but we're already balking at what maybe everybody would see as a highest priority to fix our education system, and we're not comfortable looking at $50 million worth of bonding.
So the way the bill is structured, we do July 1st of this year. Start the rulemaking process. Be led by the Department of Corrections. And it would be, if you want to go to page 14, it would be to implement the provisions of section 1, 3, and 4. So section 1 is who goes into a forensic facility, and that's where judiciaries. Section 3 is your, make sure before I go there, I'm doing it right, yeah,
Page
it's your
6.
restoration of, no, it's not. 3 or 4. Where's your comments?
Previous placement. is figured
Yeah,
out.
but that's you're not guilty by reason of insanity. And then, who doesn't deal with that competence?
Is there a time frame by which we're supposed to be doing something or?
Who, us?
Yeah, no, I don't mean that to be snotty. I mean, truly, like, for this bill, like, are we?
Well, next week or so, yeah, I mean, it's gotta coordinate with them working on their amendments. And Martin was hoping to have more things tied up by tomorrow, but it's not gonna work, because we just don't have the time because we're tied up on the floor today and tomorrow. So there'd be more work next week, but we get those 2 committees starting to get involved. Human Services Committee didn't want to get involved until Judiciary came out with their first amendment. They're coming out today.
But they should have all been working on their section of it. So
What happened?
Well, and so the chair guessed where I was going, and yeah, I mean, I just looked at their agendas this week. Healthcare has 0 testimony and human services has 1 piece of testimony on this bill.
They're not focused on.
I would love to stay in my lane, but it's hard to stay out of that.
I don't know.
Well, again,
So-
they're an important piece, and there was a history of us getting to the end line at the end of the session, and it'll just either die or we'll put some half-baked plan into place that won't be beneficial to any.
No, now that Martin has some language, I'm assuming it's being presented to his committee this morning. Whatever it will be available this morning. I can reach out to Martin and Teresa and ask for a meeting of the 4 chairs to now really start doubling down for this. Now that there's some new language.
We have to.
We can do that. Walk around the floor today, plenty of time. We gotta work on this, folks. So, rulemaking. Right now, the way the structure of the bill is, by July 1st of this year, the DOC is gonna start working on promulgating rules. And it is for folks, the definition of folks who are coming into the permit, who would be available, who would go into a forensic facility for competency restoration. It would be for folks who are coming into a forensic facility who are not guilty by reason of insanity. And it would go into what the structure of the forensic facility would look like.
Clinically appropriate standards.
Where you read.
I'm on
Oh,
page
yeah. Yes.
line 8 of
Rules would establish.
Same thing as a community-based facility.
All right.
What page are you on?
page 8, page 14, line 8.
Line 8 through 18,
That's to be determined.
but it's gonna be the rules that are gonna determine. This is, the rules are gonna determine how the whole structure is set
No,
up.
I understand that, but I'm saying,
That's what's gonna happen here. So going through rulemaking is a very complicated, long process. So the way the bill is structured, July 1st, the Commissioner of Corrections will consult with Department of Health, Mental Health, and Dale. And it would be the Department of Corrections would adopt these rules.
Yeah, I'm not ready to hand over the rulemaking to these places and to these entities until we hear that's an appropriate group of entities to be making these rules. This is the ACLU point that was made just this morning.
So that's one part of the bill that we can work on. Now, for the rules process, because a lot of folks have not seen this play out. Sometimes the rules carry out the intent of law. Your rules is when the rubber hits the road in terms of how services are delivered. So what the bill also contemplates is they're gonna start developing the rules. And in October of this year, DOC in collaboration with those other departments would submit a written report to us, Human Services Committee and Judiciary Committee, and our colleagues, the same colleagues in the Senate. And it would contain the draft rules. And then they have a list of other things that that report should address. It doesn't say if we weigh in on this, we can't act. These committees can't act on behalf of the legislature when we're out of session. Kind of maybe give some thoughts back. But there's no legal action that we can take when we're out of session. So you could kind of weigh in and say, well, we don't like this, we want to look at this, but then there's no other check back. So the rules process is department or agency will draft up some rules and it goes out for public comment. And that can be a period of 3 months, 4 months. receive all the public comments. They can change the rules based on the public comments and keep the rules. They can work through that. And then they'll come out with draft rules that is then presented to LCAR, Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, for approval.
And is the makeup of LCAR, which I would question, would they have the background knowledge on this to be able to?
Well, it will be a different LCAR
Right,
because it'll be a different legislative
absolutely.
next year, because it's gonna take a year to a year and a half to promulgate rules. It doesn't happen in a matter of 2 months. It happens, it takes a good year. 8 months, it takes a good year to promulgate rules. All right, so, and those rules don't go into effect till they've been approved by the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. So that's the way the bill is structured. And then the thinking is that come January 1st of 28, the rules will be in place. And then the facility then kicks it. That's the structure. Just laying out the structure.
It just takes a while to load.
No, for some reason, when I click on committees.
Right.
And then you can't go anywhere. Doesn't
Right.
do anything.
Because I think it's loading.
No, it just
No?
stays put. It doesn't
Okay.
do anything.
Oh,
So
same
I
thing's
have to
happening,
turn the whole thing off and reboot it.
same thing happens on my phone.
It's really, it does this.
Committee, access to committees on my
It
phone
does
doesn't do it.
this all the time. I was just trying to figure out who's not out.
Yeah, call it up.
Can't even get to it.
Hey, you're the only young one here, fix this shit.
No, I went downstairs to fix it and they funny. Fix it again.
That's a joint committee, right?
Tina shut down my iPad.
So just out of curiosity,
So it's Trevor as chair, Seth Baumgartz as vice, Higley, Bodie, Sapkowitz, Beck, Plunkett, Weeks.
So some of those folks will stay. Some will not.
Right.
And they meet every other week of session, even during the session, there's a lot. They meet Thursdays every other week. So when a department or agency is ready to submit the rules to LCAR, the chairs of those respective committees that put in that language would receive a copy of those rules. And the chairs need to report back to legislative council. Are the rules carrying out the intent of the legislation? Are they wishes or do they go beyond what the legislation is requiring? And we check. We submit that back to legislative council, and then that gets submitted to LCAR in terms of how those committees wait. A lot of times chairs don't even respond to that. Some do, some don't. I've been in situations where the rules go beyond the intent of the law.
Is there another, oh, sorry, Joe. Is there another way instead of doing rules or somehow having a committee together to present something back to the legislature? Because if we can all come on the same page as to what we're looking at or hopefully looking at, I think our intent is never really looked at after it goes into the rules, because it's this other group that's made it, then LCAR that probably has no understanding of all the different pieces of this puzzle, and then they can make the decision what they want. And that may not have been the intent. So is there a piece in here anywhere that we can have where something comes back to whoever the legislature is next year for review before these rules get put in to solid place. It may not be where any of us want to be.
So the way it's drafted right now, there will be an interim report October 1st to our committees. This committee, Judiciary, Human Services, and then Health and Welfare, Judiciary, Institutions. But we could weigh in, but doesn't mean that.
But it doesn't mean
So
anything.
another alternative that could happen is in addition to our standing committees getting the interim report. Joint Justice Oversight meets 6 times, once a month. And you could ask those folks, whoever are promulgating, putting together the rules, to come before joint oversight at each meeting. And ask joint oversight committee to make a recommendation to the next legislative session.
It would all, okay, that,
So let me read who's on justice oversight.
It's gonna work.
That's what I have to do. I have to turn it on. So there is Senator Lyons. Even have them up. Senator Harrison and Senator Plunkett. Institutions Committee. Senator Hashim, Judiciary. And Senator Norris, Judiciary Committee and Appropriations. On the House side, Representative Lalonde, Judiciary. Representative Trevor Squirrel, Probes. Representative Wood, Human Services. We have a new member, Representative Taylor, who replaces
Chopper.
And you're the chair, you didn't. And will you be the chair this summer? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it switches bienniums. Next biennium will be the Senate. So that's who's on justice oversight. So you've got some of the committees who are currently working on this represented there. And we can make recommendations. We can't act. The only committee that can make it, do any action on session is joint fiscal committee or the emergency. That's it. But justice oversight can make recommendations come January to the respective committees. No, we're not ready to go forward with this. This needs to change. Yes, we are ready to go forward with this. I'm just putting options on the table.
oh, I just want another avenue that we just aren't punt kicking this to the Rules Committee. They could come up with even worse than what we're looking at.
Yeah, but they're not privy in terms of.
Right, that's what I'm
They would
saying.
be dependent on chairs.
And Sean, we're sorry that I've interrupted you.
No, it's, mine might be a silly thing. I'm just looking for some perspective here. So these people were in Waterbury in 2011.
You know, I'm not so sure about that. They might have been. You know, I know Elizabeth Duke was there. She may have been the only one. I think these.
When you say that woman's name, there was
She
someone who
was
killed
the
somebody?
battery.
Killed in our community.
In the
Oh, right,
Ever
Yeah.
Energizer
All right,
battery.
this-
She's
That was
still,
in the early 80s.
Okay, let's say for now, so 2011, and I'm just trying to get some perspective here because I'm new at this. Why wasn't something done then? Why wasn't there why wasn't
Because I
this?
don't think we had the number. That's what I was getting at. She was not guilty by reason of insanity.
But you had other people who were,
But I don't know if we had a stronger community system. back
okay,
then. I'm
I'm just
not
trying
so
to get
sure
some
how many
history.
people were held at the state hospital that were incompetent to stand trial. I mean, they would go there if it's a hospital order. But then afterwards, once they received competency, they would take the next step, which could be a detainee in a correctional facility because they have a charge. And if they would restore competency while they were at the state hospital, they would go back into corrections as a detainee until
Okay.
they could stand trial.
So there was a little more of a system then when they had
Yeah.
the Waterbury facility.
Well, we're not sure.
I'm
But we're not
quite
really-
sure of that. And also, I don't think there were the number of folks that we're starting to see come in. And I think what we're gonna start seeing, what I'm kind of hearing, picking up, we're gonna start seeing a lot more folks coming in because their brains are getting fried with the substance use out there. So it's not mental health.
Absolutely.
That's,
Yes.
All right.
that's already starting.
I'm just trying to understand why this is happening now and where, but at the same time, there hasn't been a forensics place since then.
I'm not sure there really was back then.
Okay, so we're not even like,
Unless
just trying to get. like,
Unless they could do it when we lost the certification. We lost certification. Our state hospital, when was that? 2008, 2003,
I was gonna say 2008 or
we
2009.
lost Medicaid certification.
Oh.
And I think it was due to a lot of inappropriate, the facility was not appropriate, and I think there was staffing stuff.
There was,
too.
there
It
were some
was a variety-
practices.
Yeah, there were, so we lost certification by CMS, which meant we lost Medicaid coverage, so it was all on our nickel. Which back then, maybe you could house these folks, because you weren't gonna lose Medicaid.
Right.
I don't know if that was connected, but we were decertified, I remember that day.
Oh, absolutely.
Move was to privatize a move was Fletcher Allen.
Oh,
Okay.
wow,
That
we
was-
went through that.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. I'm just trying to get a little history and understand what got us.
No, 2005, that was 2000.
Right, well, there was a number,
Oh, yeah, long time.
Okay.
That's,
but there
well, we
are a
lost the
number of
hospital in Irene,
pieces
thank
that
God.
aren't connecting.
But what Jack said today, to me, I picked up also, was that he's really seeing a lot of this now because it's societal, that these people don't have support, that they don't have a home or some place to be at. So they're being pushed into like homelessness or whatever and making bad decisions, and decisions are getting worse and they're taking drugs. And so I'm trying to understand this whole mess that we're dealing with right now. And not just the bill, but why we're writing this bill.
Well, I mean, societies go through ups and
Yeah.
downs, right?
Yep.
So you're gonna see like in the seventies, for example, drugs skyrocket. And a lot of the reasons you see a higher incarceration rates from the nineties into the early mid-2000s that we're trying to figure out now are from laws that went into effect in the eighties, early nineties based on that. So it's a cycle. Everything in life is a cycle, right? But when Alice mentioned, people being messed up with drugs, that's 100% true that that this is being a problem, right? But the thing that was just closed, there's so much science behind what that's doing to people's brains. So we have to be prepared for that too. People, I don't just mean that the people a little bit intellectually lazy. It's making people go batty. There's some real mental health problems.
It's not mental health, it's a brain.
Well, right, but I mean,
It's damage.
right, there's some damage. However we want to word it, I don't have it
But
right
it's,
now. But the problem is, these are really big problems. And I'm not saying it's skyrocketing or that, that all of a sudden we're gonna have 100 people tomorrow or anything like that. But it's important to keep context. We didn't have this.
Right.
We didn't have.
Oh, well, and that's what I'm trying to understand,
Thank you, ma'am.
But I guess, but the other thing too, is that, does it mean then that we should just be shooting to build a new forensics facility? Is that the right answer? The right answer is what New Hampshire is doing. New Hampshire is opening up a new 26-bed facility, right? And that's the right thing to do, and let mental health take care of it. Is that not?
It's not all mental health. The
Right.
TBI is not mental.
Okay.
Right.
So there's so many
Alzheimer's
layers to
dementia,
this.
Yeah, it's not mental illness.
Substance use.
So it's
yeah.
not all mental health.
Gotcha.
It affects
it's-
your cognitive, but it could-
Yeah.
It's not a mental.
Okay.
illness.
Well, thank you for.
I just want to reiterate that, back to the bill, I'm not convinced that we've got the right people writing the rules.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why I'm trying to bring everything back. We can change some of the structure. If we want. That's what I'm trying to think. Do you do a feasibility study? Do you do that before you give them authority to go through the rulemaking process. I'm just looking at this.
There's gotta be a stopgap if we start this before it gets to rules, because I'm just afraid, like you just said, and I was referring to that. I'm not sure if we've got the right people
Right. The
taking the.
people on the train are writing the rules, and I'm not convinced the train should be set free.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was conversation if we do looking at the feasibility of this before put anything in place, come back, whatever. To have an outside group. Would NCSL do something? Would Council of State Governments do something? For this? I don't know.
Crime research group.
I think Prime Research Group, they do more data.
Yeah.
I don't think they would weigh in on
And
this.
one other piece of this, because it always comes up to be the dead all stop all of this, is the Medicaid piece. Where does it, what pieces does it affect? So that as we're dealing with that, because financially, that's a huge question in this. And so that has to be part of this discussion.
Yeah, I'm interested in an outside group doing it. I think the question is, who's the client? Is it the legislature or AHS or a department? And how does that operate then, Yeah.
But I get you.
I'm gonna have a conversation with the speaker, because they've done this in much council. I mean, if people are interested in pursuing that, we can do some legwork. Conversations. See.
Your description of the two committees was very helpful to me. What's the committee that you chair in the summertime?
Joint Justice,
One more time.
Joint Justice Oversight.
Joint Justice Oversight.
I mean, if folks are interested in seeing if we have an outside entity that would do a feasibility study, is that something that we're interested in?
Yeah.
Yes, because I think if we have the same groups together, we're going to keep kicking this can down the road or not, or feel extremely uncomfortable of who thinks they're running it or collaborating together.
That means finding money to do it. And I wonder if we could find any cash in the gap.
Yeah, do we have the ability to do that now, to go back to the
We
Capitol bill?
got plenty of time.
And it can
I mean, but how much money are you talking?
We don't know.
Okay,
Listen to the master, young.
And that's just one section, right? We've got some other sections here that.
So I can pursue if folks are interested in feasibility study, which I think people are. Something independent, maybe there could be something through NCSL or Council of State Governments. And have discussions with leadership, the speaker, they're aware of more opportunities. Our fiscal office may be aware.
But again, we don't want a study just to say we're having a study
Right.
that ends up
Well,
doing
we have to
nothing.
be very
We've got a
clear.
good list of questions already that we would like to see the
Well,
study group come up.
we put language in.
No, I understand, but I mean, you've got your handwritten list of questions.
Yeah.
It's what hopefully the study group would answer before we start recommending spending money. Making rules.
So then the next piece is I'm going into the the forensic facility definition.
Page.
Starts on page 10. I'm just kind of wondering, do we want to lay out a structure that if we do have a forensic facility, regardless of where it's housed, or who's in,
Right.
layout, what it should look like. And possibly bring in BGS, talk to them. Their feedback on it, because nobody has spoken to BGS.
Yes.
Well, someone said to me the other day, with all the buildings that the state owns, why isn't there some? And I said, I don't think there's, right.
Interesting. Do you remember with the state hospital replacement, there was a group, you do remember the Futures Committee, right? And,
Oh, I lived it.
and their charge was develop a set of principles that would sort of guide the conversation. Mostly agreed on.
Thank God for Irene, because we'd still be on.
You'd probably still be talking about.
I mean, we looked at so many configurations for that, and I'll tell you, when Irene was happening that day, and I was seeing Waterbury flying, I said, good, we'll finally get rid of the state hospital and get off the dime. Because that was I became chair here in 2005, and that was the first thing we did.
I took the role of interim VSEA ED the day after Irene, when a fifth of state government was underwater. Bad job.
But we've been working from 2005 to 11 with all this configuration, how do we replace the state hospital? That's when we got into the IND Medicaid. Because the thinking was having it run privately at Fletcher Allen, but we were concerned it was when the 35-mile radius and we wouldn't get Medicaid. And then they wanted to build the secure residential next door to the Waterbury Hospital, and the neighbors were.
Right.
Then we had a change in governor, and the governor put a stop to that, which was probably good because it would have flooded. I mean, thank goodness for Irene. But when we lost the state hospital, the focus wasn't forensic. The focus was how are we gonna move forward? We've got folks who are involuntarily need hospital setting. And we haven't got anything. And we quickly were putting something together.
There is a state employee, I think, under mental health who specializes in CMS that we've had in before. Would it be worth
Oh, I don't even.
bringing an expert on the CMS Medicaid funding, just to see if there were different scenarios, like mental health running a unit or something in a correctional
Right.
facility? Does that count towards the beds of the Vermont Psychiatric Hospital? Just so we even know it.
Or does it count towards corrections?
Right.
Yeah, right. So,
Right, well,
Could
that's
you do
why,
some digging with Tina?
that's why I said.
yeah, I'm thinking, I'm spacing on her name, yeah.
Claire's here.
Sure, CMS expert under Department of Mental Health.
Well, I would mostly be Medicaid policy.
Would it be Diva?
We do have.
It was Diva, wasn't
It would
it?
be Diva.
Yeah.
Medicaid policy is moved from Diva to AHS, so I think that would be the best.
What, AHS or Diva?
AHS Medicaid policy.
So it'd be with the agency, it'd be under the secretary's office.
Medicaid policy is best.
Okay, so it's not Diva anymore.
So that's why I said we have to know this piece of the
Yeah.
Medicaid
The
and what
1115 waiver is being administered by Diva.
Yes, Diva implements Medicaid payments, and they work on that. It's just the very small Medicaid policy office was moved to.
So if you could find out something, can you work with Tina
Yeah,
on
sure.
that? So are people? I'll take a break here because we have someone coming in 11:15. So would folks be interested on page 10, 11 to keep some of that language in terms of what forensic facility going forward really should look like, knowing it's not going to be corrections, but kind of wordsmith that language a little bit. Just putting thoughts on the table.
Definitely need some tweaking.
Needs a lot of tweaking. I'm just trying to think with, is that something that folks would be?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just trying to think of scheduling.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to take a break because we're scheduled quarter after. Quarter after 11, we're scheduled, so let's